Howdy folks, and welcome back to World of Warships with the mighty Jingles. I was taking a look through my World of Warships video library today and realised that I actually have over 100 video clips of various different battles played during the closed beta test of World of Warships. And of course I got as far as tier 8 in the closed beta test, and so a lot of these video clips feature ships that I'm just not going to get my hands on again anytime soon, particularly with the changes made to the economy in World of Warships towards the end of the closed beta test. So rather than hold on to these video clips until I unlock the ships again and then can use them in a review, I thought I may as well start getting these video clips out there while they're still relevant. This one, of course, isn't relevant. What are you talking about, Jingles? This is a ship that's no longer in the game. This is the Kitakami. It's a premium Japanese tier 8 cruiser. So what you're now watching is a video of a ship that is no longer in World of Warships. This thing was removed from the game at the end of the closed beta test and replaced with a brand new premium tier 8 Japanese cruiser. Very, very good premium tier 8 Japanese cruiser, the Otago. Why did they remove the Kitakami? Well, they never really said, but I suspect it was because this ship was pretty much just a one-trick pony. And the one trick that this pony could do was fire lots and lots and lots of torpedoes. The Kitakami had 20 torpedo launchers on each side of the ship. It's 40 torpedoes this thing could put in the water at once. And that was pretty much it. That's all this thing could do. But that was a pretty impressive trick, particularly if the Kitakami managed to sneak up and, well, I fired off that spread of 20 torpedoes around the side of this island without actually being locked on to any one of those targets. I haven't actually targeted anybody. I just fired all of those torpedoes blind. And, yeah, it doesn't really seem to matter, does it? When you have that many torpedoes in the water, well, it just becomes a case of throw enough shit at the wall and some of it's gonna stick. And that's pretty much what the Kitakami did. And that's pretty much all this thing could do, because aside from having 40 torpedo tubes, and that's an impressive number of torpedo tubes, but aside from that, it really didn't have anything else, hence one trick pony. Now, I'm pretty much going from memory here because the ship isn't in the game anymore, so I can't flash up World of Warships and go and check the numbers. So for once, I actually have an excuse if I get some of my facts and figures wrong. And it doesn't matter because this ship isn't in the game anymore. But if I recall correctly, the problem with the Kitakami, well, there were numerous problems with the Kitakami. The guns were terrible. It did not have a lot of health, 25,900 health. It had no armour whatsoever. It wasn't slow, but it wasn't fast enough. But the biggest problem with the Kitakami was the fact that the ship could be detected from a range of 10 kilometres. And the torpedoes all had a range of 10 kilometres. Now, that might sound like not much of a problem. You just close to 10 kilometres, fire your torpedoes, turn around and get out of there. And that's pretty much what you did when you were sailing the Kitakami. However, the second that you were in range of them, they can see you. And at 10 kilometres in a tier 8 cruiser, you can guarantee that you're in range of them as well. And at 10 kilometres, it takes some time for these torpedoes to get there. And all they have to do is turn. And all of your torpedoes are going to miss. So this was one heck of a frustrating ship to drive. The Kitakami was a high-tier cruiser in name only. It didn't have things that other high-tier cruisers had, like decent anti-aircraft firepower. It didn't even have the defensive fire anti-aircraft cooldown that other cruisers at tier 6 and above get. In fact, it performed and handled a heck of a lot more like a high-tier destroyer, except a high-tier destroyer that, while it might have had a bit more health, it didn't have the speed, it didn't have the maneuverability, it didn't really have the firepower, and it definitely didn't have the low detectability, all of which made this thing very, very easy to kill once it had been spotted. Due to the Kitakami's terrible armour, it was highly susceptible to taking damage from high explosive shells. And also due to the fact that this thing was basically made out of torpedo tubes in more or less the same way the St. Louis down at tier 3 is made out of guns. Anytime you got hit by a high explosive shell and you were in the Kitakami, not only would it always penetrate and do full damage, but you were pretty much guaranteed to lose some of your torpedo tubes at the same time. And when firing torpedoes is pretty much the only thing that you can do, that was really, really bad news. Now, you could certainly have fun in this ship. I mean, 40 torpedo tubes is fun. but that wasn't enough to compensate for all of the things that the Kitakami lacked. It didn't have armour, it didn't have health, its guns were terrible, it didn't have much in the way of anti-aircraft guns, and it didn't have the anti-aircraft cooldown that other cruisers had. In fact, it didn't have any cooldowns at all. And so, in an effort to address some of the issues that people were having with their Kitakamis, Wargaming gave this thing a smokescreen launcher. And just that one little change, giving this thing a smokescreen launcher, like the Iwaki Alpha ship that was given to the alpha testers, which is also a cruiser that has a smokescreen launcher, that revolutionised the way that you could play your Kitakami, because up until that point you had to pretty much try to play it like an American destroyer. Why do you say an American destroyer, Jingles? Surely you mean a Japanese destroyer. Most American destroyers would kill to have torpedoes that have a 10-kilometer range. Well, yeah, that's true. But American destroyers had to take advantage, and still do have to take advantage, of concealment, natural terrain features like islands in order to ambush ships and get their shorter range torpedoes successfully on target. Japanese destroyers don't have to do that because they usually have a much lower detection range than the range of their torpedoes, so they can usually fire their torpedoes with impunity. You couldn't do that in the Kitakami because the second you were in range to fire your torpedoes, you'd been detected. The smokescreen changed all of that overnight. I almost feel sorry for this battleship, by the way.
Enemy battleship foundered.
Almost, but not quite. And that's because of his reaction in chat, which you'll see popping up any second now. He really didn't like getting torpedoed. There it is. And that's what makes it all worthwhile. I don't know what he's complaining about. It was a fair fight. The thing is, with my terrible armour and low health pool, 2 citadel penetrations from his guns are enough to kill me. And it was the smokescreen that saved my ass. In fact, I didn't know this at the time, but now that I have a better understanding of how the concealment system works in World of Warships, it does actually turn out that the Kitakami's relatively low speed, in combination with its smokescreen launcher, makes this thing much more... what's the right way to put this? Most people actually have no idea how smokescreens work in World of Warships, and until very recently I didn't know exactly either. But here's how they do work. Every time you activate your smokescreen launcher, what happens is it kind of pulses every 5 seconds, and each 5 seconds it generates a blob of smoke. And that blob of smoke is 450 meters wide. Now, when you see a destroyer moving at full speed, generating smoke and popping in and out of detection, what's actually happening is he's moving too quickly. That in the 5 seconds it takes to lay each pulse of smoke, he's actually moving out of the 450 meter wide blob of smoke and then being concealed by the next one. So it's quite counterintuitive. When you're actually laying a smokescreen, you should be slowing down in order to stay concealed within each blob of smoke that the smokescreen generator pulses. And that's why you're constantly seeing destroyers, for example, who are usually moving at full speed because they're trying to avoid being shot at, popping in and out of view range as they're laying smoke. Well, that didn't really happen with the Kitakami because when this thing's manoeuvring, it's just not that fast. So it always stayed hidden inside the smokescreen. And of course it wasn't firing its guns because its guns were useless. So it wasn't doing anything to give its position away. Now, of course, I didn't know that at the time. I just thought, wow, these guys can't shoot for shit and none of them are hitting me. And it was actually my own ignorance and the relatively slow speed of the Kitakami once you start trying to toss it into high-speed manoeuvres that was saving my ass, in combination with the smokescreen launcher that Wargaming gave to this ship later on in the closed beta test. Of course, now that I've opened my big mouth and explained exactly how smokescreens work, I do realise that all the destroyer drivers are going, oh, so that's how it works. And everybody else is going, for God's sake, Jingles, why did you have to open your big mouth? And I've just made life 10 times more difficult for anybody who doesn't sail destroyers in World of Warships. Yeah, well, sorry about that. Knowledge is never a bad thing. But seriously though, all joking aside, I'm never going to apologise for explaining how the mechanics of a game work, because I firmly believe that knowledge can only make us all better players. However, having said that, I can sympathise to an extent with people who are getting sick and tired of being torpedoed to death, but only to an extent, because seriously guys, a lot of you out there, you're really not making it hard for us. I personally rarely get hit by torpedoes. Well, I rarely get hit by enemy torpedoes. I get hit by friendly torpedoes all the time. And when I do get hit by enemy torpedoes, I usually get hit by a lot of them at once, and it's very spectacular and very messy, because I've been taken completely by surprise. And that's really the only time you should be getting killed by anybody who's firing torpedoes at you, regardless of whether they're in a destroyer or whether they were in the Kitakami, the Tier 8 premium Japanese cruiser. And the reason for that is because you should be paying attention to what's going on around you and taking some very, very simple and basic precautions, like turning. It wasn't unusual when I was sailing my Kitakami to fire off a spread of 20 torpedoes and either see all of them miss or only one or possibly two of them hit. And the reason for that is because you had to fire these things at extreme range, because the second you were in range to launch your torpedoes, you'd already been detected. And you just couldn't afford to get shot at when you were driving this thing, because it had no armour and very, very low health. And at a range of 10 kilometres, you've got all the time in the world to take evasive manoeuvres and ensure that none of those torpedoes hit. So most of the time, when I was sinking people in the Kitakami, they were bad players. They just weren't paying attention to what was going on around them. And the Kitakami was very, very good at killing bad players. Good players would give you significant problems when you were in this ship. And the Kitakami was Tier 8. And you get more good players the higher up the tiers you go, because hopefully they've learnt a bit more in the time it took them to get there. And that's why the Kitakami just wasn't that good a ship. It was a one-trick pony that was only good for killing bad players. And there weren't that many bad players around in the kind of battles that this thing got into. I mean, sure, there were some, of course. This is online gaming after all. But there weren't that many compared to the number of sheer donkeys you get down at the lower levels. And so I suspect the reason that the Kitakami was removed from World of Warships and replaced with the Otago at Tier 8, and this is pure speculation of course, I don't actually know that this is correct, Wargaming certainly don't share these kind of details with me, but I suspect what was happening was that people were looking at the Kitakami in the tech tree, they were seeing 40 torpedo tubes, they were thinking, I have got to get me one of those. They went ahead and bought it, they played a couple of games, and they quickly realised that this thing was a one-trick pony that was only good for one thing, and they just got bored with it. And so I suspect that, like me, the majority of Kitakami owners in the closed beta test only really played this ship for 4 or 5 games before getting bored with it. And that's why Wargaming removed it and replaced it with the Otago, which is a much, much better all-round Tier 8 cruiser. I certainly don't miss my Kitakami. I'm glad that I had it, so I at least had the opportunity to play it, see what it was like, and very, very quickly realise that there are far, far better cruisers out there, not necessarily Tier 8 cruisers. I'd rather be in a Cleveland than a Kitakami, and the Cleveland doesn't get any torpedo launchers. It's just a much more versatile ship. The Kitakami was only really good for killing idiots like this. At a range of 10 kilometres, I start opening fire with my absolutely terrible guns. That's an enemy cruiser. I think it's a Miyoko. I'm not entirely sure. I'm not holding down Alt, which would tell me exactly what he is and show me exactly how much health he has. But it kind of looks like a Miyoko. It's got the 3 gun turrets up front and 2 turrets at the rear. Yeah, it's a Miyoko. Miyoko's a good ship. Now, I don't fire the torpedoes off at a range of 10 kilometres, which I could have done. Instead, I close, pop smoke, and I'm at a range of around about 7.4 kilometres when I start putting the fish in the water. Now he's basically being buttoned in by one destroyer over on the left, another destroyer over on the right, and me in the middle. And he's sailing directly towards that destroyer over on the left hand side of the screen. So my torpedoes are now in the water, launched at a range of 7.4 kilometres. Look at how long it's going to take those torpedoes to get there. And remember, all this guy has to do for every single one of those torpedoes to miss is turn his ship. And they're still going. And they're still going. Still on the way. All he has to do is turn the ship. Just turn the ship. It's not hard, it's not rocket science, but apparently it's really, really hard to do. Yep, that was the Kitakami for you. It was really, really good at kicking puppies. And not an awful lot else. So I certainly don't miss it, but I am at least glad that I did have the opportunity to play it, and not play it very much, thanks, because the Otago is a much, much better ship. I have actually played a game in the Otago, and did quite well. And now that more and more people are available to actually compete against at tier 7, 8 and 9, I'm going to be having a few more goes in that, and will attempt to get an Otago review up within the next week or two. But as I mentioned at the start of the video, I do also have a metric arse ton of closed beta gameplay videos, which I really need to get up while they're still at least semi-relevant. So you've got all of that to look forward to over the course of the next couple of weeks as well. So that was the Kitakami, no longer available in World of Warships. Any videos that you see of the Kitakami are going to be closed beta gameplay only. And I'm just going to leave the final word in this video to Jim Carey, who has this to say to anybody who's still complaining about torpedo spam. You tell them, Jim. Take care, folks, and I'll catch you next time.